Well, sorry about the black screen there. Hey, afternoon. How's everything going in the world of the secret by Byron, Preiss? I'm here to basically go over some information that I've been looking at in San Francisco and some alternative theories concerning the image and what the image elements mean in relationship to what work has already been done on the secret for um, the number one image that is thought to be in um, San Francisco. And so this might go a little while, but I'm going to just start by saying that I think there's a possibility that this particular image has to do with Huntington Park, and it has to do with the Flood family, and it has to do with the Fairmount Hotel and Grace Cathedral. And if you want to follow along, just get your browser going and let's start looking at the Fairmont Hotel and 982. So if you truly believe or possibly believe that the numbers in these puzzles are street addresses, like I think they are in the puzzle for Chicago, which is lane 222, you'll see an arc of lights. I think this is 982. And I think the address that they're trying to get, take your task to the 982, is California, 982 California Street. And if you get to 982 California Street, you will find a hotel called the Fairmont, I believe it's called. And if you look at the structure around the windows on the Fairmont Hotel, at the bottom level on the street view, you will see that that is very similar to that image that you have the fortress in the very top of the image. And so I think in this particular image, you work yourself down from the top. Now, there's a fairly famous ballroom and a tiki area in this particular building. It was known for the two socialites who named the building after their father. Um, and so you get this theme of the socialites and the idea that perhaps we're talking about a building that has to do with uh, that. So the Fairmont is a hotel that's at the top of Nob Hill. Uh, it was named after a U.S. Senator, James Graham Fair. Now, so if you're looking for the Fair people, right, you might want to look for James Graham Fair. His two daughters, Teresa Fair Orlix and Virginia Fair Vanderbilt, uh, built the hotel in his honor. Now, you have heard me say in the past that I think that the puzzles are related when it comes to looking at the other images and the elements in the images and the people involved. And I have posited that in the New York image that we need to go to the Whitney Museum that is associated with the Vanderbilts, and that we need to go specifically to the hotel there where the ship of the Titanic survivors were taken to. And so one time it was mentioned that these two puzzles are like bookends, if you will, of the book. And so if you look at that from the perspective that the Vanderbilts could be related to both this particular landmark and also a landmark that's in New York City, making those two bookends. So again, the Fair people looking at Senator James Graham Fair. Now, the two daughters were basically socialites. In other words, they basically attended a lot of balls. And if you look at the top of the image, it gives you that idea of, a feeling of ballrooms or of that type of thing. Um, One thing that you should note is that this hotel was nearly complete before the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, and it survived. And architect and engineer Julia Morgan uh, was the first one to use reinforced concrete uh, in a structure. And so, important note there. using reinforced concrete. Now, if you go look at the back of the book, you see some of these reinforced concrete pieces that are unassembled at a construction site. And so you wonder, is the back of the book trying to tell you that you need to look for a place where this reinforced concrete was used to build a structure? Again, the back of the book gives you more clues than you might normally think of. So the first appearance in the book is this Maetre d', right? We see the Maetre d'. Well, you need to ask yourself, and well, what is a Maetre d'? What is a Maetre d'? And so the Maetre d' is actually uh, Maitre d' hotel. In other words, there's more to the word maitre d' than just the term. And so, if you think that perhaps the uh, maitre d', the maitre demon, it has something to do with the hotel, then you're well on your way to looking at this as a potential starting point for the puzzle here in San Francisco. Okay, so let's just go back to our map, and let's say you start at the 982, and that's the Fairmount, right? And you want to go on up California Avenue. And so 982, if you go down the street in front of the Fairmount, you'll see that there's a bunch of flags of all the nations hanging there. And that's because this is supposedly where the United Nations was founded. And now, if you go back to the idea that when they presented this all for Boston, they said, well, look at all the flags. Look at all the flags, said JP. Well, the reason he said that is because he was giving you a clue, basically, to the San Francisco puzzle when making up a solution for the Boston one. Okay, well, the next thing down the street, if you go on this leisurely tour of San Francisco, you'll note that as you go down California, you are actually on the trolley car. You notice in the middle of the street on California, you have the actual trolley car lanes. Well, let's see. There's what people think to be a trolley lantern in there. And in the last line of a certain verse, it says, a whistle sounds. Well, you're going to have to be pretty proximate to the trolley route in order to hear a whistle sounds. But let's look at some other reasons why a whistle might sound. Well, there was a lot of laborers that worked in the mines, and these mines were of what descent? And there's a lot of Asians that worked in the railroad industry, and they were of what descent? And who is it that is most responsible for bringing Chinese Americans to the United States and San Francisco? It's the railroad. It's the railroad. The railroad is what brought the Chinese to California. And on the left hand here, you have the Crocker Garage. Now let's just see who Mr. Crocker was. Okay, let's just do some research here. Let's pull up a page on Charles Crocker. So Charles Crocker, he was a railroad executive who was one of the founders of the Central Pacific Railroad. Okay, well, are we now maybe thinking that these puzzles are related and that one of them has this word central too in it? And perhaps we can use that word central in more than just one puzzle. And if you want to use the Central Railroad in Chicago, and perhaps use the Central High Line Railroad in New York, perhaps all of these puzzles actually have to do with the railroad and the way in which the railroads developed from east to west. And we all know that there was the Transcontinental Railroad that came out of all this, which, if you're talking about immigration, you should not ignore the impact of the Transcontinental Railroad on immigration. In fact, it's, along with the Mormon Trail, probably the top two immigration factors involved here. Okay, so he was born in upstate New York, And he got together with this idea from Theodore Judah, who was the guy that was talking about this railroad. And his partners then became Mark Hopkins, Chris Huntington, and Leland Stafford. And they became known as the Big Four. Okay, well, let's see. Where was it that Byron Preiss' future wife was attending college? Where was that again? Where was that? Oh, you're now yelling at your screen. Stanford. Stanford University? Oh, well, maybe Stanford University, possibly. Again, you got to remember the Transcontinental Railroad brought together the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, the Southern Pacific, and they then drove that golden spike in that railroad tie. You ever noticed how that little image of that pearl kind of has a glow around it? I don't know. Uh, how much of the back of the book is dedicated to banking? Ooh, never really thought about much of that. Uh, well, there is quite a bit, and in fact, Crocker was briefly the controlling shareholder of Wells Fargo. But then he went ahead and founded his own bank called the Crocker National Bank. One of the things about Crocker that's kind of interesting is that one of the oddities is that he built this fence on Nob Hill around his palatial estate. Uh, and it was around a guy by the name of Young. And Young's occupation was an undertaker. Uh, okay, he was an undertaker. Where else do we have an undertaker? Oh, that's right, in Boston, where we had Copp's Hill, and the it was found basically on the land that, or an area that used to be occupied by Sacco and Venetti's undertaking business. Oh, and it was what? Copp's Hill? And now I'm talking about Nob Hill? Talked about Copp's Hill in Boston, and now we're talking about Nob Hill in San Francisco. Okay, so anyway, this guy had a feud with his neighbor by the name of Young, and it ended up with him building this 40-foot high fence. And I get the sense from this image that there has something to do with a fencing in, a perimeter, if you will, that kind of thing. Well, guess where that used to be? It's where the Grace Cathedral is now. So if you look at Nob Hill, you look at Crocker, his house was right there where the Grace Cathedral is. Okay, Collis Huntington's house was basically on the land in which Huntington Square, the park, is. Um, and Collis Huntington, again, a member of the Big Four who started the Transcontinental Railroad, was also involved in the coal business and mining ore, and drew a great amount of money from that endeavor. He was involved with the Southern Pacific Railroad, which I think we will later look into when we get to another puzzle. And guess what other railroad he had? The Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad. And so that one would bring you into Ohio, where another one of the treasures was found. Um, so that's the information on Huntington. Let's look at Leland Stanford. So Leland Stanford is obviously the namesake benefactor, husband of the lady who, after he died, donated the money to the university to get started. He migrated to California during the gold rush. He was president of the Central Pacific Railroad and later the Southern Pacific Railroad. He had a lot of impact. So his wife was Jane Elizabeth Lathrop. And they didn't have any children. And then they finally had a son, Leland DeWitt Sanford. And his father was 44 when that child was born, by the way. And so, again, he is another of the early pioneers in California. But after his death, it really is interesting that his wife donated everything to start the university. But let me go back to the Chinese connection. So the gold strike in California had brought a large influx of newcomers into the territory, including Chinese immigrants who faced persecution. Anti-Chinese sentiment became a political issue over time. In a message to the legislature on January 1862, Governor Stanford said the following. And for you woke people out there who like to remove statues, I think the bulldozers should be rolling as soon as I get done stating this quote. To my mind, it's clear that the settlement among us of an inferior race is to be discouraged by every legitimate means. Asia, with her numberless millions, sends to our shores the dregs of her population. Large numbers of this class are already here, and unless we do something early to check their immigration, the question, which of the two tides of immigration meeting upon the shores of the Pacific shall be turned back, will be forced upon our consideration, when far more difficult than now of disposal. There can be no doubt but the presence among us of numbers of degraded and distinct people must exercise a deleterious influence upon the superior race, and to a certain extent repel desirable immigration. Okay, so that was in January of 1862. The words out of the benefactor of Stanford University, which has, in 1980, how many people and of what race attending it? Ladies and gentlemen, one of the lampoons involved in 1980 was Mr. Leland Stanford, because his university had become a mecca for basically Asian students. Okay, all right. Okay, so let's go to his wife, because his wife has this famous watch, the famous watch of Stanford. Okay, so let's go to. Oh, by the way, if you look at this image of Leland DeWitt Stanford, look at the picture they have of Leland DeWitt Stanford on Wikipedia, and then compare it to the mask. Compare it. Anyway, so he died of typhoid at age 15. So that's why Jane Elizabeth Lathrop. Okay, so Jane Elizabeth Lathrop Stanford has this watch. Okay, now first of all, we need to talk about the death of her from strychnine poisoning. So after she gave all this money to Stanford, she then goes on a sailing trip, and she ends up in January 14 of 1905 at her Nob Hill mansion in San Francisco. Stanford consumed mineral water that tasted bitter. She quickly forced herself to vomit the water, and prompting from the assistance of her maid. So she spit it out like the water veers, like the water veered out of her mouth when she spit this water out. So in the sky, the water veers, right? Okay. So anyway, so they had a big investigation of this, and she was on her way to Japan, believe it or not, when she was finally poisoned completely to death on the ship that she was on. Okay, so that gets you the information about that. So let's look at the other one. The other one in the big three. We have to go to Hopkins. So we got this other one in the big three here. Mark Hopkins. what can we say about Mark Hopkins? He was a railroad executive. Uh, he had uh, he built he built a mansion up there. He got in on the gold rush, made money in gold, uh, and he was a member of the Big Four of the railroad. Um, okay, so here's the funny thing about Hopkins. Hopkins died without leaving a will, though his fortune was 40 million. It was inherited by his wife. Uh, she ended up hiring a guy by the name of Edward Francis Searles to assist in finishing up one of the mansions. And lo and behold, she ends up hooking up with this guy and ends up getting married. Uh, he had to basically, uh, uh, Timothy Hopkins basically got cut out of the will. And so there was a big lawsuit over this, and he got a few $1 million. So there's the depraved and unbalanced life of Hopkins. Okay, well, the reason I went through all this is because all of these people formed the neighborhood, or the majority of the neighborhood, on Nob Hill. These are the people on Nobb's Hill. But then we have to add one more. Okay, so we've talked about Crocker and the Crocker Garage, and we've looked at the Crocker Garage a little bit. Let's go move over here to looking at um, the next item, which is the flood. Oh, I lost my street view. I got to go back. Hold on. I get a street view of San Francisco. Let's just do the Great Cathedral. And a reason I want you to look at the gates of the cathedral here pretty soon is because in the image background you'll see the spires of that building, and you'll also see some other features in this area that might make sense to you. But we're working towards the grace. We're working towards that building. Sorry, I lost my map. I must have closed that window by accident. Okay, so uh, why can't I get that to come up? Oh, here it is. It's way out in California. I want to see it. I want to go down there. I want to get street view. I want to get that street view of that. And okay, let's just my bad. Sorry about this. Well, anyway, let's read. I'll come back and do that. So James Leary Flood was the son of James Clare Flood, owner of the Comstock Lode, and inherited the Flood fortune in 1889. Okay, so there's another group called the Bonanza Group, the Bonanza people. Okay, and the Bonanza people were basically the Comstock Lode, the people that were the 49ers who made their fortune in that. And one of the guys decided to build up on Snob Hill. And again, I'm going to start referring to this as Snob Hill because I think the snub that perhaps the writers of The Secret were going for was that these were a bunch of snobs and they all lived on Snob Hill. And if you read the back of the book and you learn about these captains of the industry, and the other obvious connection I didn't make is to Rockefeller. And where did Rockefeller make his millions, by the way? Oh, yeah, the railroad thing. And he had what? Cleveland? Okay, so anyway, we're talking about so the older Flood made his money at the Comstock Lode, and the younger Flood was basically I don't know, spending all the money that his father had made. And so James Leary Flood was the subject of a notorious California court case immortalized in the book The Strange Case of Constance Flood. And this is where we're getting to the nut cutting of the image. So you've got the water, right? And you've got the water pouring over in a number of different areas. So you've got all of this stuff, these burnt, I don't know, pieces of wood in water. Well, why would you have all of the wood in water? It's because what the author and the artist is trying to tell you is that you have this California fire, you have the earthquake that causes the fire burns all of the wooden houses, the one that's built of concrete, and the structures that, well, not concrete, but that were being built with concrete, stay there. I mentioned the picket fence earlier, and I forgot to mention, if you go look at that image closely, some of those details are fences. They're fences. They're not just lines drawn by the artist. They're actually a fence around something, right? So you've got several fences around things. Uh, the Flood Mansion was notorious for having a bronze fixture fence constructed during its original construction. And so the fence was made out of bronze. Well, are there bronze details in this image? Maybe. Okay, so let's look at the strange case of Constance Flood. And so James Leary Flood married Rosina Pete Fritz and raised a young girl. Isn't that kind of weird? Rosina, and her nickname was Pete. That in itself is a little odd. They started to raise a girl, which they called Constance May, as a daughter in their home. Now, again, Constance May was just this girl that Rosina, you see a rose in that image? Have you always thought the rose was probably related to somebody else? Maybe it's actually this Rosina. Uh, so, uh, so after his wife died, which was Rosina, the next year or within the year, he married her sister, Maud Lee Fritz. At which time, young Constance was given a new name, dispatched to a convent, and never invited to join the Flood family again. Oh, let's go look at the image again. Okay, we've been looking at this image trying to figure out why do we have, we're trying to figure out this image. Why do we have this image in a nun outfit? You people have been thinking that this is a kimono. A kimono does not have this design on it. A kimono has the designs of a tiki bar. A tiki bar. Go Google any image of a kimono, and then go Google an image of I gotta go get that link. Go Google an image of a 3-color monostatic schema. Go Google a basically a covenant robe, and then look at the part that goes over the top of the robe that has the sleeves and has the figure, the caricature, the image on the front of it. It's basically the sleeves and that center section. So what we're looking at in this image is we are not looking at pearl. We're not looking at pearl in this image. We're looking at a woman in a convent dress. This lady is wearing a convent dress. So if this image is somebody that's related to a convent, I submit to you at this hour of the day. And so some of those areas where there's that fence is underneath the pearl. You can see that fence because it's raised. The black is the bottom, and then it's raised. Look at the table. Going around the table on the edge of the table is raised. There's a spike fence there. And the clock on the table, is it really an alarm clock, or look closely, it's a pocket watch? And Leland Stanford's wife was notorious for having to auction off her jewelry collection in order to raise money for Stanford University. And if that's a pocket watch, it has more to do with the railroads, and it could be something else. So let's just, look at that idea there. These people that were the barons of the railroad industry were known to be snakes, if you will. And they call these people snakes. If you look, there's a dollar sign in the in a number of places. And my best evidence for this being a religious figure is if you look above the pearl and think cross. Look above the pearl and start thinking cross. When you look above the pearl and you start thinking crosses, how many crosses do you now see above the pearl below her chin? How many crosses are you seeing there? I'm starting to see the crosses now. Oh my God, there's crosses under there. This is a religious figure. Who is it? It's Constance. I'm telling you, this is Constance. Okay, so I was going to, okay, I'm going to go do a tangent here. 1980s, 1980s. In 1981, there was a hit single by Kim Carnes. Kim Carnes had the best-selling record of 1981. Kim Carnes had the best-selling record of 1981. And guess who the record was about? Betty Davis. The song was She's Got Betty Davis Eyes. Okay, we've all been fascinated with these eyes. We haven't quite been able to figure out connection to the eyes. What is it about Betty Davis eyes? Well, if you think that, Carnes, well, we could go down a rabbit hole with Carnes right now, but just think about Betty Davis. Betty Davis was in a movie called The Sisters. And The Sisters is a movie about the San Francisco earthquake and about a man. Well, I'll let you look up the movie The Sisters. But anyway, it was a movie about the San Francisco earthquake. And she was famously, there's a long video of Betty Davis and Betty Davis's eyes at that. And so we got the possible Betty Davis eyes connection. Okay, James C. Flood. Okay, we're moving to the James Flood mansion. All right, so I started talking about Flood. He's got this daughter, Constance. Constance is the image figure. That's who we're talking about, is Constance Flood. What is the Flood mansion? Okay, how much of the book talks about rich people, bashes the rich people, points out rich people, etc.? Okay, the Flood mansion is basically in 1980 where all of the wealthy California people have joined the Pacific Union Club. So the Pacific Union Club is like a fortress. It's like a place that you cannot get into unless you are one of the wealthiest people in the world. And so the Flood Mansion was one of the first to be built with brownstone. And so if you look at some of the image figure and you start thinking brownstone, maybe you'll see a few more things in there that you might not have. So the mansion was the only one on Nob Hill to survive the 1906 earthquake and fire. Okay, you're looking for a historic structure or a historic place in San Francisco. Why would you not go to the only place, or on Nob Hill? I mean, there's other places, but why would you not go to the only place on Nob Hill? And again, that white thing kind of looks like a knob. The other ones were all burned. So here you've got the one of stone, right, in the middle of those others that burnt down. Okay, so we talked about Flood Mansion. We talked about the Fairmount and the connections to the Fairmount, right? We talked about Jane Stanford's watch. You can Google a picture of Jane Stanford's watch. When you Google a picture of Jane Stanford's watch, the first thing that's going to strike you when you Google this is that it has a diamond encrusted rose with petals on it. And the diamond encrusted rose with the petals on a table. So are we looking at a watch on a table with a rose on a table with a watch? Maybe there's a confusing rebus in there, but I encourage you to go Google uh, basically her watch, Jane Stanford's jewelry, um, and then look for the watch that was famously sold, and it's got this diamond encrusted flower. I consider it a rose. Anyway, on it. Uh, I might be stretching a bit with that, but I truly think that that has something to do with it. Okay, we talked about Charles Crocker. We talked about how the Central Pacific Railroad kill that one. Kill this one. Okay, so we already talked about the fact that the Grace Cathedral was built basically on Snob Hill. Now, so we need to go back to Flood and look at the Bonanza Kings. Flood Bonanza Kings. Okay, so the other members of the Bonanza Kings, again, we're trying to point out the people that are in the back of the book, like the Maetre Demon. The Maetre Demon, oh, by the way, Betty Davis's first job was as a Maetre Demon. That was Betty Davis's. She's got Betty Davis eyes, right? Anyway, the Consolidated Virginia Mining Company. So we had James Graham Fair and James Flood, two people that are notorious on Nob Hill. Again, we need to add to that John William McKay because he was one. Oh, and guess what? He was in the New York, Texas, and Mexican Railway Company. And he also headed the telegraph business. Well, man, this might just send me back over to Telegraph Hill, might just send me back to Coit Tower. But anyway, again, gold and silver mining associated with Flood. So his wife also became a noted hostess for decades and entertained royalty and had lavish parties. Uh, so the connection here is that if you get into McKay, he then gets you into this commercial cable company, Jay Gould, Western Union Telegraph, and Transatlantic Cables. So you get a little bit dangerous when you start looking into McKay because he might send you into the whole idea of the telegraph. But again, totally related to that. Okay, got to go back. Oh, Bonanza Kings. Oh, sorry about that. Close the browser I wanted to have open. I think there was only one left. We need to look at O'Brien. Where's O'Brien at? William S. O'Brien. So he was the last of the big four, but then include Fair, which is the Fairmount, Flood, which is the Flood building, and then we already talked about the guy that was on the other side of the street, Comstock, and then we talked about the other four that were involved in the railroad industry. So basically, this was the guy that would Flood opened up a saloon on Washington Street, and they also became part of the Wells Fargo. He was the oldest and least forceful of the Silver Kings, but easily best liked. He never forgot his friends from pre-consolidation Virginia days, and so at the time he was one of the 100 wealthiest Americans. He died of Bright's disease, and he was buried at Calvary Cemetery. And then his remains were moved to Holy Cross. So there's really not as much information about this particular guy. But he was the O'Brien in Flood and O'Brien, if you will. All right. So we talked about Constance and the flood thing. Well, you're asking, well, where does this lead me? Well, I was looking at the lips in the rows on the table, and I call them the lips because if you start looking at this image on the table, the leaves are lips. The mouth, there's a pair of lips in the rose petal. There's a pair of lips in the vine. And I don't know if those are lips or Chinese cookies, but I'm going to call them lips because we have this emphasis on the lips on the image figure. And so that then takes me back to let's just go to take me a minute. I got to get back to my street view. So I'm going to go Grace. Let's just do the Flood Mansion, San Francisco. Okay, so I'm going to go to the Larry Flood Mansion. Oh, nope, I don't want to go to the Flood Mansion. I don't want to go that. I want to go to, I want to go this to over here. Because the Flood Mansion is over by the San Francisco Cable Car Museum, and you can really, confuse the hell out of yourself if you start looking over there and you're trying to be over in the in the other part of town. So we're going to Huntington Park. We're going back to Huntington Park. So I was on my street view, and I was heading over to Huntington Park, right? And I started looking at this fountain in the middle, and I started thinking, well, what does that kind of look like? Well, it looked to me a little bit like the lips on that image. So if you consider that the brick image at the top is the Fairmount, right? And then you start looking for more details, like in the petal of the flower. And you start seeing that in the petal of the flower, you have the statue that's at the middle. And when you look at this, you've got these fish or these Asian figures with the water coming out of them. And then you've got the other detail of the lips on the fish. And they keep jacking with you down there in Cherokee Park by telling you to go to the Stevenson Fountain and look at the boat. Well, the reason they've been dicking with you and doing that to you is because they've been telling you need to go to San Francisco and look for the fountain that has details on it. Again, the secret tribute, the people that did that know. Okay, so just look at this fountain. So you've got these naked guys and their foot is on a dragon or a fish with some lips open. Okay? Look at those lips. Look at those lips. Look at those lips. At the top, you've got the Asian fixture that look like, oh, by the way, does that face look a little bit like the guy in the other image where you've just got that floating head? Well, anyway, so you've got the water veering here, right? And then you got these tortoise shells coming out, and you have a whole, the whole color scheme of this area is so similar to that border. So the real question then becomes, okay, you're now looking at the fountain. Look closely at the pedestal part of the fountain and ignore the turtles and the Buddha heads on the top. Okay? Let's just start ignoring that part. Does that not look like the pedestal and base of that? Does that not look like the pedestal base for the table? You have to take out, but Does that not look like the pedestal base for that table? And so if that's the pedestal base for the table, and then you've got the flood figure, right? And then the jewel appears to be around a perimeter fence, if you will. And so I went and started looking at this location, and I started looking for a perimeter. Well, you've got four perimeters that are all shaped like that detail underneath her, uh, underneath. You have four perimeters that are like that, all lined with park benches. And again, I don't know what the hell this park looked like in 1981. Could have been totally reconfigured since 1981. But look at the cathedral and look at the white uh, two spires. Those spires appear in that. That is the framed outline of your figure. So your figure image is Constance. She's wearing a cathedral robe, and she would fit perfectly in any of those four archways that make up the front of the Grace Cathedral, which, by the way, we're talking about stuff in water. We're talking about a flood. Look at the image again and see how this water is flowing up and over things, right? If you go to the image, that water it's not like there's water coming off and coming high. And so I'm telling you that if you look at the detail around the uh, the fortress north part at the top, and you look and you see that there's a cross in there, and then you move that forward to seeing the crosses that are in the neck area of the figure, and then you go underneath the neck and you see this detail that is uneven, by the way. And so you've got the fountain there, and then you've got this detail. So that then encircles the whole entire neck area, but we're only seeing, a quarter of it. Uh, the lip area of that rose and those fishes, uh, and then the water veering, the water coming out. And if you look at the lips of the lady figure and compare it to that of the fountain, you get another, I don't know, interesting thing to look at. I don't know if it actually gets you there or not. These, I don't know, these lights, I don't know when these lights were put in at this location. But if you like this location, don't go looking at this other fountain because it was put in 1980. But I will point out that if you go look at the archway on the other side of Huntington Park, that's on the building called whatever it is. What is that building over there? The Nob Hill Condominium Building, I think it is. If you look at the architectural detail on that condominium building, you'll notice that it is, well, there's a big bus on my street view, so I won't be able to see it from that angle. Maybe go over here. But if you look at the front architecturally of that building as well, it's got that same appearance that we looked at earlier. Again, we're also talking about the address being on California. I went to the corner over here by the Fairmount, and I looked at that corner on Cushman Street, and I swear that if you go to the corner of Cushman Street and you look at these the architectural cues of that building, especially the lamps, the 5 lamps, and I don't know when that was constructed, by the way, or built. But if you look at the shape of those, there is some architectural cues, and again, that's right by this this fortress, or this, not fortress, but this other building that has a specific architectural design. And the giants. There's the giants. On my particular image, I see a picture of the giants there with a guy in a baseball hat standing right in front of that building. Uh, but just to sum up, if you start looking at some of the architectural cues in the front of the Grace Cathedral, some of the history of this area, some of the history of Constance flood, the possibility of tying in the Bonanza Kings and the railroad and Snob Hill, and this all being a lampoon about Snob Hill, I think it gives you a legitimate location for at least considering that these clues that you thought were a kimono is a kimono. That's not a kimono. I'm telling you, that is a nun's habit and the monastery dress that goes over the nun. That is what you're looking at. You're not looking at a woman in a kimono because a kimono looks totally different. Now, I wish I could explain to you adequately the square checkers, and I don't know if that's just to give you chocolate. Ghirardelli Square might be near here. But all of that decoding you've been trying to do in that robe, it might mean something, but what it means to me is that the robe is the important part, and the lettering not as important. Well, I went on for quite a while on this video, and I apologize for the length. But if somebody's in San Francisco and has a copy of the high-resolution image, maybe they could just go, maybe do a walk here and see if anything makes sense to them of anything that I've said, either a detail in the railing of the flood mansion fence. The brownstone might be important. The shape of the archways and the detail on the Grace Cathedral. Okay, so if you're talking about the Tower of Delight, I think that might just be the confirmation of the Transamerica Tower, which obviously could be incorporated in this solve. I do have a solve that is by the Transamerica Tower, but if you think if you truly think fairies are involved, maybe the trans thing is important. I just don't know. Well, thanks so much. I've almost went for an hour. I went for almost an hour on the solve for San Francisco, for Byron Preiss, for the secret puzzles. And I just think we need to start looking at alternative locations for Byron Preiss's secret puzzles. Because looking in Golden Gate Park is kind of, I think, just sent us off trying to match everything up to Golden Gate Park, when I think the story that this image has to tell is not about Janis Joplin, not about Charlie Chaplin, but I think it's about Constance Flood. And I think it's about her. And I think it's about the Flood Mansion. And I think it's about everything that's around the Flood Mansion. I probably am wrong. I don't know. Hey, what? Says Amy Gwen and the asterisk. Well, this is my channel. I usually do my presentations on the secret and my ideas about what could be going on with the secret puzzles. Thanks for some Forest Spinners to come over and join you. I hope you're not terribly confused by this, but I'm going to hang up on this show because, again, this was about the secret. It had nothing to do with Forest Spin. Forest Spin's one compartment over here. The secret's another compartment over here. And I haven't been doing much for this audience lately because nobody watches. Yeah, because they all think the San Francisco puzzle has to do with Golden Gate Park. And what I'm telling them in this video is that that's not a kimono. That is a robe. And when you find out next that one of the puzzles has to do with the railroad and the Mormons and Salt Lake City and Jedediah Smith, all of these puzzles work together. There's a puzzle that has to do with somebody that has a club foot. One of the puzzles has to do with a guy with a club foot. Another one of them has to do with a guy by the name of Limp. And so you go from the puzzle that has to do with Limp to the puzzle that has to do with the guy with the club foot. And as you work through these puzzles, you go through the one with the Central Railroad connection. You go through the one with the railroad connection in Cleveland. You go through the Bonanza Kings connection, and you start moving from puzzle to puzzle to puzzle, realizing that Nob Hill, Cops Hill, Snob Hill, Cops Hill. And once you start pulling those all together, you then get an idea of how you can solve all of them at one time. I mean, when you start looking at the actor that has a club foot that's a fairy, it's going to take you directly to the prize. When you start looking at the Limp family and the brewing industry and the Clydesdales in St. Louis, it's going to take you directly to St. Louis. When you start looking at General George S. Patton and the Fort Knox, it's going to take you directly to Keys Park, because the author and artist repeated these themes in an image. And it's the lips. I'm telling you, it's the lips in this one that's repeated. Oh, by the way, there's a Fanny involved, maybe. My other alternative location for San Francisco involves Samoa. And I'll be back later to talk about a potential solve for San Francisco that involves wanting Samoa. You want Samoa? All right. Good night, folks.